What's the most WTF moment you've witnessed in public? I saw a guy come into the middle of a bank, pull down his pants and shit all over the carpet. Don't mind me, just making a deposit. I was riding the bus once and there was a blind man sitting next to me with his seeing eye dog. A couple stops later a man got on with a white cane and sunglasses. They sat facing each other. 30 minutes later when walking off the bus they bumped into each other and both apologized. Canadians. The one man grabbed the other man's arm and said, "Steve," and they both had a good laugh. I saw a guy in a Clockwork Orange makeup beat up a homeless man on the subway. Someone pulled the emergency brake when we were in the station so we could throw this guy off the car. Several people complained that we were going to be late when they had to wait to release the brake, as if riding all the way to Brooklyn with this ultra-violent maniac was a better option. I was once sitting in town when a few very muscular guys walked along the street carrying bicycle tires. A nearly identical group of men arrived from the other way and the two groups promptly began beating the shit out of each other with these tires, like it was a totally normal thing to do. The police were called and everything, and a couple of them seemed to be pretty badly injured. What? I was in Las Vegas during St. Patrick's Day 2006. I was at some hotel that was semi-Irish themed, though I cannot recall which one. They did have a beer pong competition going on though. I was on my way to the restrooms when I saw a midget dressed as a leprechaun. He was doing his thing walking around and having a jolly time. This girl sees him and just freaks out. She was completely smashed, just staggering about. So she sees the leprechaun, screams in excitement and runs over to him. She then proceeds to run up and try to dance freak with him. Think when you are in the club and rubbing against each other. So she tried to freak with him, but his head is about the height of her vagina. Oh yeah, and she is wearing a mini skirt. Basically what happens is she ran up screaming, shoved his face into her vagina, and then gyrated for a minute while making tons of excited noise. After about a minute of this she jumps up and cheers and runs off to the bathroom. This poor little guy just stood there, slightly staggering and looks at me. What the duck just happened? He asks me. Unfortunately I could not answer because I was laughing so damn hard. My daughter and I were moving from Chapel Hill, NC to Apex, NC. We were driving the moving truck down a rural road and saw a man who appeared to be in his late 50s mowing his yard with a riding mower. He was a very tan guy who looked like he spent a lot of time outdoors. As we got closer, we noticed that he was sitting in the seat leaning forward slightly with his eyes closed. We had a few laughs that he was hungover or even dead. We laughed about it all the way to our new apartment. We unloaded the truck and headed back to pick up a second round of stuff from the old apartment going in reverse on the same rural road. As we passed the area where the guy on the mower had been, we saw several people standing around a sheet in the yard. The sheet was not quite large enough to completely cover the man's body. His lifeless feet were still visible. The mower he had been riding was on its side next to the tree that it had hit. Turns out the guy that we were joking about being dead was actually dead. We saw a dead guy riding his lawnmower. I was on the Berlin subway on my way to my uni when something big hit the train. I was right behind the driver's cabin with a muffled sound and even entered the door I leaned against with glass dust coming out of a gap. When the train finally stopped I stumbled out still shocked what happened, as I thought something solid and big must have hit the car. Well it turned out, just as the train came into the station a student jumped in front of the subway car, hitting the door in the center. The force was great enough to knock out the door, slamming it against the inner one to the passenger cabin. The poor guy was lying on the outer door along the driver's cabin with the stunned driver sitting right next to him. And blood everywhere. 10 minutes later, I gave a presentation on how to solve a matrix in math class. Got an A for staying on topic, even though I was shivering. Body hanging from the bridge. Another time, I saw a crowd circled around two recently shot men with a widow crying over one of them. The joys of living in Mexico. Ambulance siren. Guy in car freaks out, pulls to the side of the road at full speed and sideswipes a bunch of cars before crashing an anther car that had stopped ahead of him. The ambulance ended up stopping for him. I was on the bus and I saw an old, drunk man whisper into a schoolgirl's ear. She started to silently cry and got off at the next stop. As the bus pulled away, I looked out the window and saw that she was running away as fast she could. I've seen homeless people do crazy things all the time, but there was one guy who was stirring up a load of attention. He went to a park full of kids and decided to take a bath in the park's pond. Mind you, not the cleanest of water bodies, but only so much you can do in Los Angeles. He sat down by the water's edge and very stealthily stripped down and slid into the water in a single much practiced motion. Several kids noticed and were lined up making jokes while mothers whisked them away. Some of them no doubt calling 911 for the naked man kneeled neck deep in the murky water. This isn't the messed up part. He then made his way to a far corner of the pond and ducked his head underwater to rinse his hair and didn't come back up. 30 minutes later, rescue crews are surrounding the pond. Scuba teams are pacing around looking for him. And then they motion to a utility truck with a thumbs up. This man was snagged by the filtration intake and sucked underwater face first into a small pipe. Then, for 5 terrifying seconds, the dozens of children and parents gathered to watch the rescue crews. Well, they got to see the aftermath. They got to see the bloated, discolored corpse of a dead man hoisted out of a filtration pipe in a murky pond. Minutes. Literally minutes of screaming. I'm positive it took weeks before those kids would take a bath again. That went from light to dark unexpectedly. I was sitting in a coffee shop at this sort of bathing working on my computer. This strange looking bigger guy sat down at the bar with a stool between us. He had a coffee and some lunch. After he finished eating his lunch, he proceeded to lift up his shirt, exposing his bare belly which has a long, vertical scab on it. He then started picking at the scab and eating the pieces. Seriously the grossest thing I've seen. Orgy on the subway 3 AM in New York City. 1992. I mention the year because if cell phones had been as prevalent as they are now it would have been on the news. There were 8 of them and they seemed to be on acid or ecstasy. The entire car gathered 4 people and watched like performance art. 3 drunk guys and a girl, I hope they were drunk anyway, standing in a circle outside a bar. All 3 guys were facing each other doing the helicoptered. This was accompanied by helicopter noises from the girl standing with them. End of winter in Philadelphia. Some homeless woman in what looked like a ski suit suddenly dropped low and put her ass up against the side of a building about a couple doors down from a local Chinese restaurant and gushed liquid all over the wall. I heard the torrent hitting the wall, but averted my eyes before I could tell whether it was urine or projectile diarrhea. I witnessed this from across the street, but felt really off and unclean just having seen it. I was buying a baguette and croissants close to the biggest shopping center in town. I asked the guy, "How much is it?" In that very moment, a very loud bang shook the window panes. $2.60 or whatever the cost was. He answered just after the bang with a very serious look. We both sort of knew what had just happened. I paid him, and we went out of the bakery. A car bomb had gone off 2 blocks away, 20 kg 44 pounds of some sort of dynamite. I learned later on. Luckily, no fatalities. I work for a pretty well-known retail company, or at least in England, and a homeless man strolls in and has a chat with my manager, who's a 20-something super cool guy. He was being friendly to the homeless guy who was wondering about the browsers, and after about 10 minutes he just got his cock out and had a piss. In front of my manager and everyone in the shop, the homeless man swiftly left, and while my manager started moping up his piss, he came back in and laughed at him. Why do I work in retail? Posted this before. I was walking down High Street late one night, about 2 AM or perhaps later, on my way home from campus. A smelly bum approaches me, and immediately I think he's going to ask for money, as is common in the area. Instead, he says, "Hey man, you see those 2 girls over there, on the sidewalk across the street, about half a block down, going the opposite way from me, are 2 girls wearing dresses. Each is carrying a big bouquet of flowers. I gave them flowers, and I told them they were from you." The bum says, pointing at me, This guy is someone I've never met before. As I blinked uncomprehendingly, he yells loudly across the street, pointing at me with wild exaggerated gestures. Hey girls. This is the guy. This is the guy. The girls wave the flowers at me and call out thank yous. I continue walking home, confused. Strangest nightly encounter ever. In a restaurant in Prague, a bachelor party was seated in main seating. The groom was dressed as a gimp and was full frontal nude. The other men took turns spanking him with a leather flogging tool, so hard that the groom would lay on the floor screaming in pain, while everyone in the party laughed. The restaurant staff kept serving them like they were out on a family dinner, and everyone around them carried on with their meals like this was a normal occurrence. A guy in a nice BMW wouldn't leave the left passing lane for a guy hauling ass in a beat up Toyota. The Toyota pulled up next to him and flicked him off, and the guy in the BMW rammed him off the road Jason Bourne style. Middle-aged man in a business suit doing a shit at the side of a busy 4-lane road in broad daylight. Last Canada Day, I was at a street festival in our local version of Haight-and-Ashbury, so there tends to be a wide selection of different people around. I was granted the gift of watching a younger homeless nomad looking fella pick a beetle roach thing out of his ear, nonchalantly pass it to his friend who inspected it, and gave the not bad Obama look to the guy. The friend proceeded to put the beetle thing in his breast pocket like it was something he should keep for a rainy day. Was riding on the train in Calgary one night with a couple of friends. There was this well-dressed man who was narrating everything out. As we approached one of the downtown stops, this guy says, "Looks like we're entering downtown Calgary." My one friend is kind of annoyed by this and says, "Oh really? I thought this was Edmonton." "Thanks. This was a big mistake." The guy gets set off. "I'll make this Edmonton for you." He waits for the train to come to a complete stop and reaches into his pocket. He pulls out a handful of nails and tosses them to the ground calmly, then steps off of the train never to be seen again. Got out of a midnight showing of Back to the Future a few years ago in Amherst, MA. Some girl was in the middle of the mall taking a shit in a garbage can crying. We left her be. Came back 10 minutes later. She was on the floor. Took her home before some asshole took advantage of her. That also happened to be the first experience I had with people that go to Buffalo Wild Wings. Machete fights in West Mexico. That's as real as my life has ever gotten. Finally, I've been waiting for an opportunity to tell this story. Last winter break, I went to Colorado to go snowboarding. On the way home, I'm going through security when a woman carrying a large suitcase and a rear-facing car seat runs up behind me and asks to go ahead of me. Apparently she was running late to her flight and it was scheduled to leave in 5 minutes. At this point that SAT agent says that she has to put the car seat through the X-ray machine. The mom picks up the car seat and shoves it onto the moving belt and it slides into the machine. All of a sudden there is a violent screaming from inside of the machine. The mom starts freaking out and crying. Now that Sam is upset as well, wondering what the duck is going on inside the machine. I look at the screen and see the outline of what appears to be a small human. Next thing you know, the car seat comes out the other side. Flipped on its side, there is a baby who appears to be just a few weeks old flailing inside of the overturned car seat. Now everyone is yelling and there is quite a clusterfuck occurring. The lady talked with that SAP and was pulled to a back room. Never found out if she made that flight. It makes me concerned knowing that there are people more insane than I thought possible. Back before 9/11 and SA security madness, I once saw a kid at airport security refuse to let go of his teddy bear. Even if it was only going to be in the X-ray machine for 10 seconds, it was too long for this little fella. So what does security do? They need to X-ray the fluffy toy for drugs or weapons. But the kid won't let go. What to do? Simple. The kid get propped up on the conveyor belt and sent through the X-ray machine. Teddy bear and all. Apparently airport security's response was, "She'll be right, mate." Kid seemed fine. Gotta love Australia. One time I was sitting and waiting for the bus with my friend, and some guys drove by, poked their heads out of their car and just screamed obscenities at us. What made it even weirder was that they were all wearing baby masks. After that, they did a loop around the block to drive past us again. But that time they threw a ton of pens at us. Like, an unusual amount of pens to have in a car. Maybe 60 plus pens. Anyway, the bus came before they had another chance to go around the block, so I never got to see what they were going to do next. But I doubt it was going to be good. Used to work in a supermarket. I was by the front entrance when I saw a mother and her daughter who must have been about 12 or 13 years old walk into the store. The daughter started to complain to her mother, and so the mother picked her up and put the daughter in the seat part of the cart that is normally reserved for toddlers. They walked about 10 feet and the cart fell forward and snapped the girl's tibia. The bone pierced the skin. My manager ran up when he heard screaming and saw what happened, and he proceeded to puke in a potted plant. It was pretty horrifying. Thanks for watching. Comment your favorite story and consider subscribing if you enjoyed this video, and if you want to see more of Reddit Universe,